Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Armand Arton, President and CEO of Arton Capital, the Honorable Philip Davis, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and the Honorable Ralph Everard Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Ministers, thank you very much for joining us. Allow me to say a few words about the Global Citizen Forum. We are a non-profit Canadian organization focused on the importance of human mobility and how migration of people is impacting economies around the world, from refugees to economic migration to the migration of the super wealthy, and how this movement of people impacts not only small islands, developing nations, but around the world. And we have seen how during the COVID, when the world stood still for a year and a half, a lot of economic impact came to our reality. Our expertise brings us today to this panel, and I'm extremely honored to be in the presence of greatest leaders in the Caribbean. Prime Minister Gonsalves, who has been for 24 years and counting, one of the greatest leaders in the region, and Prime Minister Davis of Bahamas, who has taken power over the last year.
Not 8 months.
Not even. But driving some of the fastest growing economies in CARICOM. So I will start with a very general question to both of you to share with us the importance of regional cooperation in building more sustainable economies for your countries, considering post-COVID world, inflation, and possible recession ahead.
Okay.
Prime Minister Davis.
But for me, diplomacy and trade, dialogue amongst nations is the bedrock for cooperation amongst nations. If the pandemic exposed anything to us as a people on this planet, it is that we are dependent on each other, and that together we are stronger and able to face the challenges that we face as humanity globally. One of the things that the pandemic taught me or exposed to me is that many of the developed and industrialized countries were not as sensitive as they ought to be to small island developing states like ourselves. That even heightened the need for us as small island developing states to be more cooperative and more engaging with one another, to be able to be one voice to the larger voices of the world. And so I had to remind the industrialized world and the major economies that with the pandemic, we thought that we were, as a small island developing states, we were not having access to vaccines, and they were, in our view, hoarding vaccines because they were looking after their people, and maybe self-survival is mother's first nature, they said. But what we have to remind each other, which I reminded them, is that, they will not be safe unless we are all safe. Meaning that they need to share the vaccine, because their people whom they are protecting will come to our shores. And if they come to our shores, they're likely to be exposed to the virus, just unless we too are safe and are protected against it. And so it is very important, particularly for us small island developing states, to cooperate, to have that voice, to be able to address the challenges that faces us uniquely as small island developing states.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Comrade.
The Caribbean community, CARICOM, consists of 14 independent states, small states, and 1 British overseas territory. They have a combined GDP of about 85 billion US dollars. and a population of 18.5, 19 million people, with per capita GDP from around 30,000 US dollars a year in the case of the Bahamas, to about 1,200 annually in the case of Haiti. For these countries, there are two, whatever we do internally, there are two critical strategic imperatives for economic development, for sustainable development, for security, to address the existential issues such as climate change and the financial system. We have to do two things. We have to deepen regional cooperation. So there's regionalism, very critically in a strategic sense, and multilateralism, to be engaged in the global political economy and to have entry points where you can seek particular advantages to do things within your own practical interests, consistent, of course, with universal principles of engagement as laid down in the United Nations Charter and the multilateral system generally. The regional integration has to be of an organic kind, in which the strengths and weaknesses of each individual unit is dissolved into the whole, so that the whole becomes more than a summation of the individual parts. Without, for instance, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, which is an allied institution of CARICOM, we would not have been able to fight the COVID pandemic. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, without the Seismic Research Center, which is based at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad, to which we all contribute, we would not have been able to address the matter of the volcanic eruptions, or in the case of the climate issues generally, and the weather systems, CDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, and within the whole framework of CARICOM. CARICOM rests on four fundamental pillars. One, economic integration, which includes a common market with a common external tariff in quest to a single market and a single economy. And we are at various stages towards that, except the Bahamas, which is outside of the Caribbean single market and economy. Then there is the matter of functional cooperation, particularly in matters like health, education, and the like. Thirdly, the coordination of foreign policy. And fourthly, the matter of citizen security and national security generally. Now, all of those things are intertwined with our development, our economic development, economic growth, and broadly sustainable development. During the period of COVID, where the economies really crashed, ranging between negative growth between close to 20% to 2.7% in the case of my own country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That's partly because we didn't lock down, and our tourism is not quite what it is in the Bahamas and say Barbados. The only country which grew was Guyana, because it had started to produce and export oil. Now, to come out of that hole in the subsequent period is an extremely challenging one, and without the regional integration system and the multilateral system, we're not going to be able to address efficaciously any of the challenges which face us. And even when we address them, the journey is complicated by other factors. Sometimes it looks as though you are you're going up a down escalator. And you're going up, and this down escalator is coming, the vagaries of the world economy and all its contradictions. And then the war in Ukraine and all the price rises. It is just a phenomenal bundle of challenges. And while you may have a strategic frame for building back better and stronger, you need, it's a beautiful old word I'm going to use, you need to respair, R-E-S-P-A-I-R. It's a word, if you look it up, it means fresh hope. It goes beyond the matter of just building back better or stronger. It's something very existential, because after periods of immense dislocation, of convulsions, and even despair, you have to have a new frame of reference. But that frame of reference cannot only be national within your own particular boundaries, but it has to be a regional one, and you have to look outwards. I'll just add one final point. It's a matter we saw in the case of the United Kingdom with the European Union. Islands, and in the Caribbean, we are either an island civilization or a seaboard, in the case of Guyana and Belize in Central America, and of course, Suriname. Small countries, seaboard civilization, us, island civilizations. Island civilization and seaboard civilizations are peculiar phenomena. When you are within a small island, an island by definition, you're surrounded by water. There is an inward gaze, but there's also an outward look. And there's this tension all the time between the inward gaze and the outward look. And you resolve that tension, you resolve that contradiction by regionalism and multilateralism. And that's why we are so active in terms of foreign policy, in terms of the engagement with the global economy. But as my brother Philip said, many, many times, the global economy disappoints us. Mm-hmm. And the decision makers globally, they create additional challenges and problems for us. And we can talk about some of those.
Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to actually take your words on the great voices and sometimes the restrictions that they are screaming. When we look in the last 25 years, you were forced to diversify from sugar, banana production to tourism, financial sector, offshore, economic citizenship, cryptocurrency now, and these international forces are somehow always limiting what's gaming in the case of Antigua. How do you navigate between these restrictions and between your sovereign rights to navigate? And in the example of Bahamas, in the last year, we have seen you have attracted some of the major players in the world in the crypto. How do you plan to make that sustainable and keep your independence?
Well, you start from, as my brother Ralph has indicated, we are very often disappointed by global forces and external shocks that's beyond our control. You speak about the last 25 years. The Bahamas, the modern Bahamas is built on two pillars: tourism, which made up approximately 80% of our GDP, and then financial services. Globally, our financial services was assaulted by the OECD and the other forces, FTF, and we survived by continuing to be innovative and creative and attempting to stay ahead of those forces. Hence, we, for example, recognize the space of crypto, recognize that it was here and was here to stay. And so I immediately, upon assuming office, recognizing that and recognizing that 20% of my GDP that I had lost because of the intervention of the industrialized world, that was the way to replace it. So I went after the crypto and the digital space. And then I tied that into one of the other consequential issues that faces our small island development states. That is the consequence of climate change. And the Bahamas is an ocean state spreading over 100,000 square miles. We are amongst the 10 most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change. Our islands could disappear within the next 30 years. And so the effort to reduce the carbon footprint is a crisis for us. And what we have recognized is that the Bahamas, our small island states have nothing to do with the carbon emissions. But quite apart from not emitting, we are also one of the major and significant carbon sink of the world. And so I've indicated to some of my people, we have been collecting the garbage out of the air because of our seagrass, mangroves, but we're not being paid for it. So we are now engaging the voluntary market, and we're going to tie that to the crypto space as well, so that we'll be continuing to innovate to see how we can have what I call revenue sources, try to we'll make the industrialized world more accountable for their actions, and we'll be continuing along those lines. But it is for us, and it is to continue to stick together, stay together, and let those who are responsible for the consequences that we are now suffering pay for it. I can say unequivocally that more than 50% of my national debt today is as a direct result of the consequences of climate change. Adaptation and mitigation, you have to borrow to recover, borrow to restore, to bring back the country to normalcy. And but now, all we have are pledges. I'm pledged fatigue. And hopefully by this COP27 coming up, we'll see more real action from the world.
I hope so.
Oh,
Prime Minister.
Armand, if you look at what has been happening in the Caribbean, in the CARICOM region, strategically, we have been seeking to have a paradigm shift from a colonial or amended colonial economy to a modern, many-sided, competitive post-colonial economy, which is at once national, regional, and global. Defining features of the colonial or the amended colonial economy included reliance on an unlimited supply of unskilled and cheap labor, and subsidies at home and preferential markets overseas. You have to shift from that for all kinds of objective reasons, including the global economy, to a many-sided, diversified, competitive, modern, and then by modern including advanced science and technology, in which there's a reliance on unlimited supplies of skilled, educated labor, priced at a level in the chain of the International Division of Labor, and with no reliance on any external market preferences and with very limited subsidies at home unless it's a strategic industry. Now, to achieve strategically this paradigm shift, we have to be in a world where there is a fairness. You cut out the preferences for bananas and sugar in the marketplace, and you say, go into financial services. And as soon as you go into financial services,
OECD.
the Europeans say, it's a harmful tax regime. Never mind that London was doing this thing. It's only with the Ukraine war
Delaware too, don't forget.
that we hear about London grad, where a whole set of the oligarchs there, and what they do, they take one or two of them, take the yacht here and there, but they haven't addressed the real problem in the system. In Delaware and Colorado and all the rest of it. So you're not being fair. And then a country like the Bahamas, for instance, and Barbados, a country which has a high level of human development and a high per capita GDP, you say to them, they are locked out from any concessionary financing. When in fact what we need to do for middle income countries is that we need to have what is called in the literature now an MVI. You have to have a many-sided multi-vulnerability index so that you use different criteria for concessional financing. Because as Philip says, when you look at the debt profile and you look at the amount of money we have to spend, for instance, on mitigation and adaptation in relation to the existential issue of climate change, we don't contribute anything to this, or hardly anything, but yet we are on the front line. And then you tell me from the IMF that, hey, your debt to GDP is out of whack with some set of standards. Well, Heavenly Father, I mean, that's what you have to appeal to in these circumstances. How can you expect in an unfair system like that, that we can make this paradigm shift, which we are seeking to do, and we spend a lot of resources to do this, against the backdrop, let us be clear on this, against a backdrop of a legacy of underdevelopment. And when we say, in addressing that legacy of underdevelopment, we must put on the agenda reparations for native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies. They say, we are not going there. We need to have a sensible, objective, multilateral conversation on these issues. And these are 21st century issues. From my perspective, you say I've been Prime Minister for 24 years. That's more, I've only been 21 years.
I plan ahead.
Yeah, it's okay, it's okay. I was re-elected for my 5th term. We don't have term limits in 2020. So, God willing, I'll go 24 years. Now, there are countries which want to keep us still addressing 20th century contradictions and 20th century problems. We have serious 21st century problems. And in the 3rd decade of the 21st century, we have to address these in an objective manner. And the old categories of left and right are gone through gone out of the door. And we have to watch objectively where we are. Unfortunately, as I was saying to both Philip and the Secretary General of the OAS a short while ago, and who is in the audience here, that unfortunately men's minds are still weighed down by the ghosts from the past, and we use them to govern the present, and they become present ghosts. We have to stop that. Everybody in this audience knows that we have to stop that, but yet there are political forces which simply feed on these ghosts, which are debilitating. And if it's one thing which, I mean, I've come all the way for this forum, is to give this message that we have to allow small island developing states to have the space within the global system to not just survive, but to thrive. The United States of America tends to talk about they're exceptional, American exceptionalism. Well, there's something called small island exceptionalism, which there has to be a category in the global order which recognizes this. And I'm not asking for any special privileges. I'm just asking for fairness and reasonableness to give my people a chance to grow and to develop sustainably in accordance with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which we agreed upon in 2015 in September at the United Nations. And goal number 17 says that we must build efficacious partnerships. And I don't think it is unreasonable to insist that all of us signed on to that. We must follow through in practical terms. Simple, straightforward.
Thank you. Prime Minister Davis, final comments from you before the break.
Well, I say that, and I'm happy to have been able to share this dialogue with Professor Ralph Gonsalves, who's been one of my idols. He's been around much longer than I. But I concur with most of the remarks he has made. The world order, the way it was constructed, has to be dismantled in some form or fashion to ensure that dialogue continues amongst all nations as equal. What you're seeing happening today is that nations are not now being, we have what I call the alliance of the aggrieved. Nations are coming together not for the good of all, but for the very now interests of their own particular pursuits. And that is something that we need to have a lot of dialogue about to change that trajectory. And the time has come, as I said, to dismantle the ghosts that haunts us and do what I have asked by the Summit of Americas to do. And that is, we should continue the dialogue. And dialogue with those who we disagree with is perhaps more important than having dialogue with those with whom we always agree.
Thank you. Prime Ministers, I'm sure that your voice has been heard beyond this stage, and this is what Concordia is all about, spreading the message across its platform around the world. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.